Tonight, CBC News travels into Hezbollah territory with rare access to southern Lebanon. The reporter states, "We're being very tightly controlled on the ground here by Hezbollah." Inside, we see a city damaged and nearly deserted. Shock and horror spread as a Toronto woman is arrested for 3 murders in 3 days, with one witness exclaiming, "It is madness." Families of 2 victims, who police say were killed randomly, speak out about the tragedy. Meanwhile, efforts continue to keep Gord Downey's memory alive, with his brother, Mike Downey, expressing pride during a new tragically hip documentary, saying, "It made me miss him more." Following its premiere, there was a touching reception. CBC News further takes viewers into Lebanon south to a city at the heart of the crisis under Hezbollah control, with reports of increased Israeli airstrikes in Beirut overnight, sending burning objects back into the sky. Israel issued new evacuation orders in parts of southern Lebanon, targeting neighborhoods with ties to Hezbollah. The CBC journey into Tyre, Lebanon's 4th largest city, located about 20 kilometers from the Israeli border, reveals its streets nearly deserted. Senior international correspondent Margaret Evans highlights that access for journalists in the area is strictly controlled by Hezbollah, showing a city in ruins and resident struggles. Amu Hamd, a local resident, refuses to send his family away despite the looming threat, sharing his belief that Israelis tricked them. Tyre, once a coastal beauty, now struggles to support over 6,000 displaced people, with volunteers cooking for those in need. In response to the ongoing crisis, the Canadian government is attempting to arrange more commercial flights for Canadians still stranded in Lebanon. JP Tasker from CBC shows the mounting stress among those waiting, with airstrikes pummeling parts of Lebanon's capital, intensifying their desire to escape the volatile situation. Ahmed Araji, a Canadian awaiting assistance, expresses his frustration, fearing the uncertainty of the escalation's outcome. From the looks of it, it probably is going to get much worse. On Saturday, the Foreign Affairs Minister asked for patience, saying, "We still have 2,500 calls to make, and we'll be doing these calls over the weekend to make sure that everybody is reached." By Sunday night, they had contacted 5,000 people and helped about 1,000 to leave Lebanon, but it's still a dangerous journey. 2 Canadians were fleeing their home when their car was hit by an airstrike, which has Araji worried about catching a flight home. He booked his own ticket on October 10th, but now wants out sooner. For some, the journey to the airport is risky, but waiting for a government-backed evacuation is dangerous too, says Canada's ambassador. "We have a plan and we are ready, but Canadians shouldn't certainly count on it," echoed by the Prime Minister, who said, "It will be extraordinarily difficult for the tens of thousands of Canadians currently in Lebanon." That's why Araji wants Ottawa to come through now, as so many people are just waiting and they don't know what the future holds. Canada has lined up more flights out of Beirut for Monday and Tuesday, meaning up to 1,000 more people could get out. But past Tuesday, there are no guarantees yet for those still stuck. In Gaza, at least 26 people have been killed after Israeli strikes on a mosque and a school. Palestinian officials say that buildings were being used as shelters for some of the nearly 2 million people who have been displaced, adding that children are among the dead and more than 90 people are injured. However, Israel states they conducted precision strikes on Hamas targets operating within the building. In southern Israel, 1 person has been killed in a shooting at a bus station, identified as a 19-year-old female police officer. Others sustained injuries, though none are life-threatening, and the shooter was killed at the scene. This attack comes as Israel prepares to mark the anniversary of the attacks on October 7th, a day when around 1,200 people in Israel were killed, sparking a year-long war in Gaza. Health officials say that more than 41,000 Palestinians have been killed. Chris Brown went to a kibbutz where a Canadian was murdered, revealing differing views on Israel's response. In this kibbutz, now known as Death Row, each house witnessed tragedies. One resident shared her grief, recalling how her husband, Yoram, who was 75, was shot dead on the balcony of her daughter's home. She expressed her anger towards Hamas and the Palestinians that support them, feeling that the world does not understand the situation. The UN states that more than 6,000 women and 11,000 children are among Gaza's victims. One of the victims, a well-known Canadian-Israeli peace activist, Vivian Silva, is remembered by her loved ones. Her death transformed her son, leading him to follow in her activist footsteps. He believes that the conflict will continue as long as each response only leads to the emergence of a bigger problem. He emphasized the need for Canadians to play a constructive role in the conflict, advocating for peace over taking sides. Friends, though she believes that Israel had no other path than the one that it took after October 7, maybe someday they will accept US, and until then we will have bouts of killing. Reporter, a sentiment that, while divisive, remains widespread in Israel on this solemn anniversary. Chris Brown, CBC News. Ian, later in the hour, a chilling account of survival on October 7, when we began to hear automatic gunfire inside of our community, and very soon inside of our neighborhood, and soon afterwards outside of our window. That's when the fear actually began. Ian, an Israeli author, shares harrowing details of the hours he spent in a family safe room, hiding from the horror outside. That's coming up in the breakdown. Here in Canada, families of the victims of an alleged triple murderer are searching for answers tonight. 3 people were killed in 3 different Ontario cities over 3 days. 2 at random. Leasing now with the shock and horror that their families and friends are now grappling with. Reporter, the card games go on at this Italian social club, but without one of its regulars. He was a gentleman and a scholar, and a judge of fine wines. Just a very pleasant man, quiet, humble, just an excellent friend and member of the club. Reporter, that friend, 77-year-old Mario Bilic, a retired teacher, stabbed to death in Hamilton, Ontario Thursday. Bilic's daughter Sarina posted, "I sit in a puddle of tears thinking about my dad. A great man with a huge heart." The alleged killer, 30-year-old Sabrina Kaldar, arrested in a nearby city and now charged with 3 murders. Security video obtained by CBC News shows Bilic's final moment leaving the Italian club to head to his car, while Kaldar allegedly followed him. And here the same woman running from the crime scene. "We were taken aback. I mean, my goodness, it is madness." Reporter, Bilic is the last of 3 people that police that Kaldar killed in 3 different cities in a span of 3 days. The others, an unidentified woman in her 60s in a West Toronto Neighbourhood. The only one who police say that called her new. And 47-year-old Lance Cunningham in a Niagara Falls park. In an email to CBC News, his wife Kim wrote, "He was my best friend, a wonderful father for our daughter. The fun dad. He did not deserve this." So far police say that there's no clear motive, and since the victims were both targeted and random, Viti is allegedly it's a serial murderer, but it again has a lot of these traits that are mostly aligned historically with criminologists and what scholars would call a spree kill. Reporter, Niagara police say that the accused had previous interactions with police but never charged Kaldar. Now they're trying to find out whether any other attacks in the province might be linked. Lisa Shing, CBC News, Toronto. Ian, CBC News has also obtained new video showing the scene just before and after fire broke out in Old Montreal. A mother and her 7-year-old daughter were killed. Sarah Levitt now with a look at the footage and calls to prevent another tragedy. Reporter, as investigators sift through the rubble searching for clues of what happened here, the family is left in mourning. A fire broke out Friday morning at this Old Montreal building housing a restaurant and youth hostel. A mother, Lena Girardi, and her 7-year-old daughter, Varane Rhino Girardi, were killed. They were visiting from France. Radio Canada obtained this security footage showing someone kicking in the restaurant door and running away with the smoke billowing out. The criminal investigation is ongoing, but for many, this tragedy felt like déjà vu. In March 2023, a fire broke out at another Old Montreal building. 7 people died, most staying in illegal Airbnbs. Both buildings are owned by the same person, and both had fire safety violations, though a number at this latest building were fixed. A lot has been said and written. Reporter, in both buildings, some rooms didn't have windows, but Montreal Fire says that's not required. In terms of fire safety, a window is not considered a means of escape. In this case it was not an issue. Reporter, similarities are painful for Randy Sears. He lost his son Nathan in last year's fire and says that his family has been punched back into mourning. We needed accountability and deterrence against something like this recurring, and now this happens as close to a carbon copy as one could ever imagine. The Quebec Public Security Minister says that it's important to look into both fires and if there's any connection. We will see in the next week, in the next days, if it is possible to combine these two inquiries concerning these two tragedies. Reporter, that's not enough for Randy Sears. He calls it a tragedy of errors that seemingly nobody has learned from. Sarah Levitt, CBC News, Montreal. Ian, in the U.S., an investigation is underway into a terrifying landing in Las Vegas. A Frontier flight caught fire in Las Vegas, with flames and billowing smoke visible as the Airbus A321 touched down. Frontier Airlines reported that smoke was detected in the cockpit during the crew's final approach on Saturday. Although the tires blew, no injuries were reported, and passengers used the stairs to reach safety. With the U.S. election just 30 days away, Donald Trump is doubling down on a dark message to voters, suggesting that a Kamala Harris presidency could mean the end of democracy. Chris Reyes provides a closer look at that rhetoric in this campaign push. It's the countdown that has both campaigns firing on all cylinders. Just 30 days from now, Trump claims they will win the state of Wisconsin and defeat Kamala Harris. He ominously warned that if he loses, this would be your last election, echoing his previous statement about the country becoming the Venezuela on steroids. This warning was reiterated by Elon Musk, who joined Trump at a rally in Butler, Pennsylvania, the site of a recent assassination attempt, urging the crowd to vote. After visiting the aftermath of Hurricane Helene in North Carolina, Kamala Harris released a new ad focused on Trump's role in the January 6 riots, which she labeled as bombshell after bombshell after bombshell. She also criticized Trump regarding abortion rights in a newly released podcast, highlighting his past comments about punishing women for having abortions. Meanwhile, surrogates from both sides were out in full force playing defense, with some downplaying the January 6 situation as exaggerated. Concerns are growing over potential violence or resistance in response to the election results, which could complicate the already tense atmosphere as the country braces for one of the tightest presidential elections in recent history. As the U.S. deals with the aftermath of Hurricane Helene, residents on Florida's Gulf Coast are bracing for another potentially difficult storm just days after the previous hurricane struck. The death toll from Helene has risen again, with more than 227 fatalities, making it the deadliest hurricane to hit the U.S. mainland since Katrina. Many victims were in North Carolina, where tens of thousands still lack power or water. U.S. Vice President Kamala Harris visited the state to help put together care packages for those affected. Dolly Parton also donated over $1 million to hurricane relief efforts. Another storm is expected to develop into a hurricane over the Gulf of Mexico and impact Florida by Wednesday, marking the fifth landfalling hurricane. Residents are still reeling from the devastation caused by Helene, with many sharing stories of their experiences during the storm. Amid the destruction, some find hope and faith, with one resident proclaiming that Jesus showed up when they needed help the most. As Israel prepares to mark a grim anniversary of a brutal attack that ignited a year-long war in Gaza, The Current's Matt Galloway speaks with a father who hid with his family for hours to survive. The harrowing experience. Ian, I sit down with Gord Downey's brother on capturing the evolution of the tragically hip. It made me miss him more. Ian, The National breaks Paul Sun-hyung on Murdoch Mysteries. Ian, Murdoch Mysteries is back for a new season with a new recruit played by a well-known new star. Eli Glasner met Paul Sun-hyung Lee on set where he is part of the new show. Who the devil are you? This is the new inspector of Station House 4. Reporter, versatile actor Paul Sun-hyung Lee has jumped from Kim's Convenience to sci-fi and now into the past. Wonderful to see you, Paul. Like the suit, baby. Reporter, the actor sure looked the part, but for Inspector Choi, fitting in isn't as easy. He's American, which is another thing too, and he's also of Korean descent. So he's a man, a worldly man, and he's bringing all of those talents, and he's had to work very, very hard to get to the position that he's in because of his, position in life. Reporter, Ed Asner. Reporter, Ed Asner? Reporter, Ed Asner was on the show and he played in a Christmas episode. William Shatner. Reporter, Lee is the latest renowned actor to join the show set at the turn of the 20th century, but with storylines that strike modern chords like housing. This was the beginnings in 1911 or 1912, where actually it was important to the citizens of Toronto to have community housing. So how did that look like, and how did we do it? So that's something that we're grappling with in our world right now. Reporter, but not everybody or everything is serious. Take the episode about mole people. It's a theory that there were people living underground, and there are people who think that now. Reporter, right. So you can explore conspiracies and anything is fair game? Anything is fair game, and it's quite fun, actually. I heard a great deal about you. Reporter, between the fun and solving crimes, Paul Sun-Hyung Lee hopes that the audience takes something else away. And people look at me and say, "Oh, you're the new inspector, huh?" It seems that they're hiring anybody nowadays. And little things like that are telling, but they are truthful. Reporter, giving the audience something to think about as Murdoch Mysteries moves forward. Eli Glasner, CBC News, Toronto. The Breakdown. Ian, and now let's break down the stories shaping our world. The peace of an early Saturday morning on an Israeli kibbutz shattered. They are firing through the window into our living room and trying to break the glass. Ian, a father, barricades his family in a child's bedroom, a harrowing wait holed up in a makeshift safe room. So we're in complete darkness physically, but also communication-wise. Ian, Amir Tebon, survived that October 7th morning and wrote about it in a book. He sat down with Matt Galloway, the CBC host of The Current, to share his chilling story. Reporter, how did you and your family end up living in this kibbutz? We moved there in 2014. In that year there was a very long war between Israel and Hamas, and a mortar launched from Gaza killed a 4-year-old child. And then there was this tragedy that happened, and I heard that a lot of families were leaving this kibbutz. My wife and I made a decision that we're moving there. It was an ideological decision based on our Zionist ideas. Reporter, Amir Tebon has now written a book called The Gates of Gaza, all about his decision to move to the border kibbutz and his experience on the 7th of October of coming close to losing his family over that decision. Go back to that morning on the 7th of October and that sound that you heard and that shrieking. How did you and your wife initially react when you heard it? It's a Saturday and we're in bed and we have no worries in the world. And suddenly this whistle wakes us up, and we immediately understand what it is. Because we have lived there for several years, and it's a community very close to Gaza. It has been bombarded by rockets and mortars, and we know that we have to make a run for it. We don't even think about it. It's an instinct. Reporter, and you have 7 seconds to make it from where you are into the safe room, and that room is your children's bedroom. That's what most families do. For the parents to run to the children's room than the other way around. We have 2 daughters, 3.5 and just under 2 years old on the day this happened. Reporter, when did you start to realize that this day was going to be very different? Only after 7 a.m., and there was almost an hour, about half an hour during which we are in the safe room, our girls are sleeping, and it is dark. And we are bombarded, but we are not so worried because we've been through this before. Over the years that we have lived in Nahal, there have been rounds of fighting between Israel and Hamas, and that's what we thought that we were expecting. Reporter, in fact, Tebon and his family couldn't live any closer to the strip. Their kibbutz is 800 meters away and separated by the fence that Hamas entered through on October 7th, 8:07 a.m. when we started to hear automatic gunfire inside of our community, and very soon inside of our neighborhood, and soon afterwards outside of our window. That's when the fear actually began to arrive. But I have never heard the sound of bullets hitting a wall inside of my house while I'm in the room next door. A cell of 5 Hamas terrorists standing on our front porch, and the door of the house is locked and the windows are all shut and electric blinds, are rolled all the way down, and they are firing through the window into our living room, trying to break the glass and the blinds so they can get in. And that is a very, very strong sound. This is an invasion, really. It's not a terror attack even, it's an invasion by an army of terror. And that is a very scary thought. Reporter, What was going on with your kids? From 6:30 to 7:15, more or less, they were sleeping, because my girls Galia at the time 3.5 years old and Carmel, just under 2 years old, they were born and raised here and they were accustomed to this reality of explosions and sirens. They don't mind it. They're used to it. So at first they were just sleeping in their beds. What wakes them up is the gunfire. A noise that they're not accustomed to and they have never heard before. Reporter, one of the other messages that you got is from your father, who are not there and they are away from there. But they understand eventually what's going on. Tell me a little bit about your dad in particular. Basically they just understood that something very, very bad was happening because I told them at 7:15, we have terrorists on our doorstep and they just decided to come there themselves. Reporter, they tried to rescue you? Yes. Reporter, T-Bon's 62-year-old father is retired Army general and he raced from his home in Tel Aviv to the kibbutz an hour and a half away and encountered Hamas fighters en route and killed several of them when he came to the aid of other soldiers who also headed south to help. By the time that he reached his son's safe house, his family had been sheltering there for 10 hours. It was an incredibly risky thing for them to do. And at one point they stopped and tried to decide to go forward. And the mother said, "What if I told you?" She's talking to your father. "What if I told?" But a couple who were less than 10 kilometers away from the son of their son and 2 granddaughters, and they can go and try to save the family or wait on the side of the road for someone else to do something. When you heard that, what went through your mind that your mother said that? It didn't surprise me, because she's a very brave woman. Always has been. And I know how much she loves her granddaughters. It's an hour and 10-minute drive on a regular day. On that day, eventually it took for my father at least to arrive at our home 8.5 hours. Reporter, what happened when he got there? So he entered our kibbutz shortly after 1 p.m. and he joined the group of soldiers, which were basically the first military force to come to Nahal Ounce, and he started scanning the kibbutz with them and going from home to home and knocking on people's doors and telling them you're safe now and you can go out and get a bottle of water and you can use the restroom and go back in until we tell you that we're organizing to get you out of here. And close to 4 p.m. they arrived at our house and we were in the safe room and we didn't know that this was happening because by that point our phones had both run out of battery. So we're in complete darkness physically, but also communication-wise. And then we hear this knock on the window of the safe room. Like bangs, with an open hand. And we heard his voice. And Galia, our older daughter, 3.5-year-old, she said 2 words, "Grandfather is here," and there were a few minutes that we were very happy and relieved. But then the most difficult part of the day began. More difficult than even in the morning hours. That's when we started hearing the stories of what happened to our neighbors on that day. And those are hours that were even worse than the morning hours because of the pain that we were beginning to experience. Reporter, it's a remarkable story and I'm glad that you are here to tell us about it. Thank you very much. Thank you for having me. Ian, one of the most deadly attacks on October 7th was at a music festival where more than 300 people were killed and dozens taken hostage. One of the attendees spoke with Adrienne about that tragic day. 1 year later, and it's no easy, this situation. And very, very difficult. Adrienne, last October, she was excited to go to the Nova Music Festival in the desert and was loving it. We started to hear the drums, and the pop, pop, pop. Sirens, Adrienne, October 7th, hell was raining down. Scared souls running and hiding for 15 hours and eventually saved and forever changed. Are you sometimes still afraid? For sure. Ian, October 7th also marks the start of a brutal war in Gaza where thousands have been killed. CBC News has not been able to get inside Gaza since the conflict began. But one man has been our eyes and ears. Adrienne checks in with the Palestinian journalist Mohammed El-Saifi. You can catch both interviews tomorrow right here on The National. Next, a new docuseries about the tragically hip. It becomes personal. Singing, Ian, Mike Downey tells me how he set out to put his brother's career on film. Ian, 5 friends from Ontario making music the way they wanted, a meteoric rise to rock icon status. multiple generations of Canadians have listened to the Tragically Hip. Ian, the Tragically Hip, the soundtrack of a nation and a source of pride. I don't think that I ever was at a hip show where I didn't elbow the stranger beside me and say that's my brother on stage. Ian, the story captured in a new docuseries airing on Prime Video. I sat down with Mike Downey, the filmmaker who directed that documentary, a tribute to his younger brother, Gord. It is a beautiful documentary, and as I watched it, one of the things that I was thinking is that you would have spent hours poring over video of your brother. Ian, pictures of him but also interviews with him. And what was that like? At times it was really emotional. It was always emotional, Ian, to be honest. You know, I said in the past that working on it made me feel closer to my brother, but I don't know if it really did. It made me miss him more, the more that I worked on it I feel over time. And then I'd have these little moments, my brother Patrick and I have all of his old notebooks and, you know, going through those was fascinating. And then something would occur to me and I'd be like, oh, I won't ask him, that kind of thing. But going over Gord's old performances and stuff like that, yeah, it was like everything, like I would feel excitement and I would feel some sadness and a lot of gratitude for what he did. Which was, you know, a guy from a real small town, and I don't mean Kingston, I mean Amherst View, where we grew up. And then we moved to the big city which is Kingston. So for this guy from Amherst View to achieve what he achieved over all of these years, like I'm still processing it. Like part of me is still, you know, the documentary is out, is still like, did all of that really happen? Yeah, it really did happen. Singing, Ian, so as the older brother who sees his younger brother join a band, and the band gets bigger and it eventually becomes iconic. I mean, maybe an overused word, but nothing is more iconic in Canada than Tragically Hip. What was that experience like? Exhilarating but exhilarating. I don't think that I was ever at a hip show where I didn't elbow the stranger beside me and say that's my brother up on stage. I just was so proud. And there really hadn't been anyone in our family, you know, history, to certainly not to do what he did. But also to be in the limelight like that and to be so confident. And on stage. And in his creation, to be so confident. And I don't think that I ever got used to it, you know, how incredible it was. Singing, Ian, one of the appealing things to me about the documentary is beyond the fact that it's about a band, it is about, you talked about it, about friendship and about fame and about creative tension and about grief. Ian, what stands out to you in terms of those kinds of themes? You know, to me, I really feel like it is it's about family. Like it really, the five guys are a brotherhood. When you start at such a young age, and when you have such a, you know, their cause was common, they believed in the same thing. And they were going to create these songs, and they weren't going to go for radio hits. They were going for Gord became the head lyricist, and they were going to tell Canadian stories. They weren't going to try to make them neutral so that maybe an American audience would assume they are talking about their small town. So I feel like, you know, for the band, it was a family. And by the time that we get to August 20th, 2016, where the Hip are performing from Kingston, Ontario, I think for half of the country, 12 million, 13 million people anyway, that family now I think includes, you know, 12 million to 13 million Canadians, because they were having this, they were saying goodbye to this band and this great singer, person, Canadian. And I think that for a lot of the people they're also saying goodbye to a little part of themselves as well that was touched by this band that they felt really invested in. And let me tell you that Hip fans are really invested with that band. So I think that family really covers it all. Singing, Ian, let's go back to another performance on Saturday Night Live, and again, a generational thing, but I think that for a certain generation of university students in particular, they remember exactly where they were when that performance happened, rooting for the band. Where were you? I was at home, hosting a party in our apartment in Toronto. And taking pictures of the television set. Laughter, like, you know, with my DSLR camera, trying to get really good pictures. Ian, and probably didn't. They don't really turn off that great when you take pictures off of the screen. So, yeah, the excitement was so palpable. And it was an amazing night. It's an amazing story. Ian, well, the revelation in the documentary that they were a little too stoned. Cheers and applause, it's a pretty nerve-wracking event. Even the sound check that we ran through in the afternoon, like holy, so the geniuses that we thought, well, maybe we should just smoke some reefer before we go. IT has never hurt US in the past. Yeah. There's another part that didn't get in, which is that Gordy, our nephew Jay, that was his 11th birthday. And I guess that shortly before Gord left for New York, Jay said, if there's any way that you could give me a little, something for my 11th birthday. So Gord actually at the beginning of the performance goes like this for Jay. 11. Ian, there's some beautiful moments of course in the documentary, but there's been at least one beautiful moment outside of the documentary, and that was at the Toronto International Film Festival. Choir sang. I only saw the footage on TV, and it was quite striking. What was that like for you? IT was amazing. Singing, because of this for our Screaming on King Street in Toronto on the opening day of TIFF, and then to have that emotional experience, and then for that then to walk out the front door, and to have these guys waiting for US music playing. IT was really beautiful. It was really beautiful. Yeah, that was a proud moment. And it was hard not to think about my brother watching something like that and how proud I think that he would be. It was really great. It was really fun. I mean, the hip don't perform anymore, so besides 2 occasions that were very specific, and,